My name is Tom McMillan. I'm State Representative in Rochester Hills. It's my third term, and I was talking to the folks here, and I don't want to really refer to us as a panel because I really do. The intent is to really have a discussion. We're in Lansing, and we have legislation, and sometimes I think that there's issues that only get a hearing in Lansing, and we don't get to get out into where everybody lives, a ways from Lansing, and really talk about these issues and hear your thoughts and concerns as well. I have an interest in elevating some of these liberty issues, and I'm glad that you're all here. And the intent would be is we're going to introduce ourselves, tell briefly a little bit about, because we're going to, like I said, be here monthly, and I'd like to let you get to know the panel and the folks here. And we're going to show a short video that I showed during a committee hearing, criminal justice, when my bill was up for a hearing earlier this year. It's an 8-minute clip that I think really sets the stage for government drones and the regulation of them and some of the issues. And then the four of us will talk. I don't know if it'll be 5 or 10 minutes each or so. And then I'd like to open it up, and it's not really questions towards us, although you certainly can ask those, but I'd also like to just hear your thoughts and concerns about it. And so with that, I'm a CPA, and I sit on the oversight committee with Rosemary Robinson, and she's on the committee as well. But I've grown to really have an interest in a lot of liberty issues, and I'm seeing that left and right is coming together. And with that, I'll let Rosemary introduce herself.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for coming out on this winter night. It shows that there are people that do and are concerned as strongly as I am and the panelists about civil liberties and what is happening here to us. I'm a Democrat, and I represent the core city of Detroit. I have what you call the ghetto area of Detroit. I go from Eastern Market to Conroe by 6 mile and around Highland Park and down along Highland Park to Grand River and down to Mack Avenue. It's an immense area. It's got a lot of problems. And with the emergency manager, which is a civil libertarian issue with me in that locale, hopefully we'll talk about that at one of our meetings and what that has done to local representation. But aside from that, tonight we're here about the drones, and I believe that I'm here really to listen to what you have to say. I have my own formed opinions, and primarily I think it's safety and the right to privacy. The right to privacy is critical, and I think there's government encroachment and also the invasion of privacy by our fellow citizens, by private citizens. There is no protection under the Constitution from our private citizens, our fellow citizens invading our liberty and our privacy. And so I think that's something that's going to change the whole body of law in the future. Constitutional law, how do we deal with that issue? Because right now the only right to privacy issues that we have in the courts is contraceptives, abortion, and what sex, how you practice sex. And I think with the arrival of the drones, we're going to see an expansion on that whole area of law. And that's what we have to look at and think about and debate. But anyhow, thank you for coming.
Yeah. Shelley, again, we're going to talk about drones after the video, but if you just introduce yourself and kind of, I'm sorry.
I get carried away there.
I'm Shelley Weisberg. I'm the Legislative Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan, and I've been working in Lansing for about 10 years. And of all the areas, issue areas we work on, privacy around the advancement of technology is perhaps the most difficult because our laws have not kept up with the technological advances. And Tom McMillan has really been at the forefront of trying to put these privacy concerns at the fore of the legislature. It's a difficult conversation to have in our legislature. So I want to thank both Rep. McMillan and Rep. Robinson for taking this on. We have Tom and I have worked together on many issues, more than you could even imagine. So I appreciate you all coming out, and I'm very excited to hear the conversation around this, because I think it's going to be meaningful moving forward, because drones are going to be a billion-dollar industry, and we need to really get some laws into place quickly.
Very good. Dennis, you and I worked, and so did Shelley, and actually Representative Robinson on NDAA, Indefinite Detention, National Defense Authorization Act. Dennis, you testified there, and I think you might have testified in my committee, well, on that in my committee on oversight. Dennis, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Okay, my name's Dennis Marburger. I'm the Oakland County Coordinator for the Michigan Campaign for Liberty. I'm also a volunteer activist with the 10th Amendment Center and the Michigan Team Leader for People Against the NDAA, or PANDA. I'm involved, philosophically I'm a libertarian. I'm involved electorally with our local Republican Party, and I see this issue as part of a broader tapestry, if you will, of the invasion of the people's rights, the natural rights that we have as part of our humanity, and I see this as a key component in that bigger picture, and I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this group and with all of you folks here in the library.
Shelley, I mean, before we get going with the video, what have you seen as far as kind of left and right sometimes on some of these issues? I don't know, Dennis, I mean, if you had asked me 10 years ago that I'd be even talking to the ACLU, I would have, thought you had been drinking something. But I worked with you more than any lobbyist in Lansing, actually, on a lot of issues, usually free speech or some kind of government tracking or whatever. What do you? Any general thoughts about what you're seeing out there? I mean.
Well, I think in general there's not a partisan division. We don't see the traditional partisan divisions in this type of privacy, these types of privacy issues. We have to always combat, Tom and I do, people's immediate reaction when Tom introduces something that I'm supporting. I mean, they immediately are confused by it. But I think over the years, really, I think we've been able to establish quite I would say that the legislators respect when we do something together. And I think, frankly, I think they appreciate it because it's the one place where they don't have to deal with partisan bickering, because I believe they're sick of it as much as you all are. So.
Right.
So I'm glad that you two were joined together when I came on the scene. I just arrived. I was just elected, so it was nice to come in to see that a coalition had already been formed. I'm on the left, but it was nice to be able to work with an open mind with the right.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I really like this panel, because Michigan Citizens for Liberty is more of a right-leaning libertarian. Shelley and the ACLU is more left-leaning libertarian, and then Rosemary and I, we vote quite. The press. There's an MLive article that said, I was quoted as saying, we don't agree on many issues. What I meant to say is there are issues with which we disagree. There's a good number, but we really do agree on a lot of issues. And with that. Let's get to the heart of it. There's I think something that will really frame the issue. I'm told that we're not going to need to have the lights out.
They're not drones, they're small, unmanned aerial systems.
The technology will evolve very quickly.
They can track you for days or weeks.
It's just too easy to become Big Brother.
Drones, or flying robots, are a type of unmanned aircraft used by the military for surveillance and warfare. But now law enforcement wants to use a version of them as well, sparking an age-old debate across America. How do you balance technology with that creepy feeling that Big Brother is watching you? California tried to answer that question at a recent public meeting.
Today we'd like to put on a demonstration and a PowerPoint in regards to small unmanned aerial systems.
This is the Sheriff of Alameda County, Gregory Ahern, and he's proposing the use of a small drone about the size of a laptop to the county's Public Protection Committee.
So I think this is the future of technology, and I think if we do this correctly, I think we'll have a great advantage over the other parts of our nation, and we can work together to make sure this works correctly.
I think local police departments want to get their hands on drones right now because they see it as an easy, efficient way to monitor what's going on in a city.
Lori Levinson is a professor of criminal law at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles.
That can be for the good, make sure people are safe, but it can also be creepy as it invades people's privacy. So that's the hot issue.
And that was the chief concern among Alameda residents at the public protection meeting.
What people are concerned about is that law-abiding citizens will be surveilled.
The best thing that a drone would be suited to do is to surveil.
This drone is just another mechanism to invade people's privacy and spy on them.
We don't use these types of devices for surveillance. It's mission specific to search areas for lost children or elderly or Alzheimer's patients, to search an area that would be very difficult for our personnel to get to.
You're having the police department saying, look, we're going to use it for good causes. We're going to use it for safety and rescue. But the people are saying, how can we trust that that's what's going to happen? You might be using that to spy on, for example, groups that are protesting because they've had their fair number of protesters, or just using it against certain communities. Once that drone's in your backyard, they can see all sorts of things. Maybe they're not illegal. Maybe they're just a little embarrassing. Or maybe they're just none of the government's business.
Prior to this meeting, Sheriff Ahern met with civil liberties advocates to hear recommendations for alleviating these concerns.
Everyone has been so professional in meeting with us repeatedly. We would also be more delighted if they had taken more of our recommendations.
One of those people he met with was Linda Lai, a lawyer with the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California, who came to the meeting to speak.
The policy as proposed invites the very kind of surveillance that the sheriff agrees in principle should not occur.
Lai says Sheriff Ahern's written privacy policy needs to be more specific about what the department can and cannot do. Right now, it's just too broad.
If the sheriff wants a drone for search and rescue, then the policy should say that he can only use it for search and rescue. Unfortunately, under his policy, he can deploy a drone for search and rescue, but then use the data for untold other purposes. That is a huge loophole. It's an exception that swallows the rule.
I just have to disagree. We're very protective of the Fourth Amendment rights, privacy rights. That is our job. That's what we have to continue to gain the public's trust, so we'd never breach that subject.
We urge you today not to approve acquisition of this device until written, meaningful safeguards are in place.
We have to follow the law, and we do follow the law, and that's our practice.
Well, I don't think the local police departments now know what to respect. They haven't been given, frankly, enough guidance. If you're going to say we're going to use it for a manhunt, what do you call a manhunt? If you say you want to use it to find missing persons, well, how far can you go with that? Does that mean all of a sudden you can use drones inside of people's apartment complex? Because the person might be there. It's a matter of drawing lines, but those lines are important.
Trevor Tim is an activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and he says drawing those lines with law enforcement can be very hard.
Police always seem to want to push the boundaries as far as the law will take them, and sometimes over those boundaries. So we have to stay vigilant against that type of behavior. Right now it's hard to tell exactly how many police departments have this technology, but the FAA itself actually estimates that as many as 10,000 drones may be flying over U.S. skies by the end of the decade. The goal is to get privacy laws in place beforehand, before they reach that level, because once there are thousands of drones in the sky and the police can use them for whatever they want, it's going to be very hard for citizens to get their lawmakers to pass privacy laws, because, you know, once the police have a certain power, they never want to relinquish it.
The more available this type of technology is, whether it's because it's just easier to find, it's cheaper, the like, the more likely it'll be abused, because the more likely it'll be used. And if you have it readily available, why would you pause and say, you know what, we want to do law enforcement the old-fashioned way. We want to use warrants. We want to send out police officers. It's just too easy to become Big Brother.
Tim says that ease has ushered in a new world of big data collection by police. And if you want an example, take your smartphone.
Right now, it is a pervasive problem where police are getting this type of information where they can track you, your exact movements for days or weeks without a warrant. The New York Times reported just last year that police agencies all over the country have gotten this type of data 1.3 million times.
You see, because there weren't strict privacy rules in place when mobile phones first exploded onto the market, it made it that much easier for law enforcement to obtain civilian data once the technology got more advanced. And if it can happen with phones, it can happen with drones.
This policy allows the cross-purposing of data so that data collected for search and rescue can be used for criminal law enforcement. That is a very large exception that needs to be closed.
Generally, there is this real friction between technology and civil liberties. And we haven't really figured out how to deal with it, and frankly, neither has the Supreme Court. Because we are developing much faster technologies that can allow law enforcement and the government to invade our privacy. Just look around you. On the street corners, you have cameras in the lights. You have now these drones that can go all around. Everywhere you go, the government can surveil you. And yet the laws written to deal with this go back to the time of, the framers of the Constitution. What did they know about drones? The Supreme Court's trying to deal with the issue of how do you balance our Fourth Amendment interests, our privacy interests, against what technology can do.
We're wading out into uncharted waters here. We need to bake in the privacy safeguards into this template.
One of those safeguards might just be more technology.
It's not that hard because of technology today to get a warrant. And so certainly law enforcement could use that and any other surveillance technique if an objective, impartial person, like a judge, says your needs outweigh the privacy interests. What the real fight is right now is letting the police unilaterally make that decision. What I think would be a problem is if we say there are some times we might need to use drones, so trust us. We'll just use them when we need to.
I actually trust Sheriff Ahern a lot, and I think he's one of the best sheriffs in the United States. Okay, so I feel that way, okay?
Thank you.
Whatever privacy framework we adopt now will be used as the baseline into the future, not only for Alameda, but for other jurisdictions across the country. We hope that Alameda becomes a leader in privacy protections, not privacy violations.
I think their goals are noble. I don't think they're out there to violate all our rights. But if we don't pay attention, that's exactly what can happen.
Alameda couldn't decide that day if they would use drones or not. The debate is still going on there. But when it comes to technology and civil liberties, the debate may never be settled. For Reason TV, I'm Paul Dietrich.
So I think that frames it well. I showed this in committee when House Bill 4455 was had a hearing in criminal justice, and let me say that they did not vote on it there, but I do have the chairman as one of the co-sponsors. There's a very large co-sponsor list. They know that something should be done, and just a matter of what. Let me just go quickly through, and I've worked with the ACLU, and actually they're national, I guess, Allie Baum, yeah, and worked with her on crafting the bill. And what it basically says is that law enforcement can use drones, but if there is imminent danger, a barricaded gunman, something like that, or if they have a warrant. But other than that, they shouldn't be using them. If they end up getting illegally obtained, or if it's outside of the scope of what I just mentioned, and they obtain footage, they have to destroy it. If that there can't be any weapons on it, and that there be very strong reporting, so that we know. I mean, this is new technology, so we know how they're using it. How often did they use it? When did they use it? Did it end up with a conviction? Things like that. And so was there a warrant? And then there'd be penalties for illegal use, just so that if they're using it, I mean, there's penalties for other activity, lien, for example, activity that they have. And so this would put some teeth into it, basically, and say that there's penalties. But when that came forward, what were some of the concerns that you heard, Shelley, when it was introduced? And just that, doesn't have to be focused on 4455, but just in general, if you want, or with the bill specifically.
Right, I think the law enforcement's response, basically, and this is mainly out of the Sheriff's Association and Oakland County to a large extent, was that they should not be limited in what they could use the information for, because that would prohibit them from going after the bad guys. I mean, it always comes back to there might be a criminal out there that we would otherwise catch. And their main argument was that they do not need a search warrant right now to sit up in the air with a helicopter and use the same type of surveillance technology. But obviously, the resources that a department would need to put a helicopter in the air and do the same surveillance work that drones could do, the resources would be incredible. They simply couldn't afford to do it. So to some extent, their capabilities to surveil are just naturally limited by their lack of resources, because at this point, what they are allowed to do, it's very expensive. But with drones, it makes it much less expensive. So that was those were their big arguments.
Right.
The key thing is that with the Fourth Amendment, and when you talk about the government and invasion of privacy, the government with a warrant, well, first of all, you have an expectation of privacy in your home. And the Fourth Amendment protects you, your person, and your property. The Fourth Amendment doesn't protect you when you're in public places. And that's where I have concern about these drones. If I'm in my backyard, they can surveil me. If this whole idea of observation, that's why I say we're going to have to look at the law differently. I think it's going to develop differently. It's going to expand. What do we consider the right to privacy? Not just within our homes, in our papers, in our person.
Right.
Because now drones do not violate the Fourth Amendment. If they were to surveil us all outside in the library, the group of us went out and were having a conversation, they could listen to what we were saying, and they could watch us. And that would not be a violation of Fourth Amendment right. So I just feel that with this new technology is going to create new problems, and that we're going to have to be very vigilant, and we're going to have to be very aggressive, and not just go by the old rules, because the old rules are not the same.
Right. I think the FAA said that by the end of the decade, there'll be 10,000 drones traversing our skies.
It's
Dennis,
scary to me.
Yeah, did you have any thoughts?
Yes, I do, Tom. I think a couple of things I'd like to bring up here is, one is, I believe that privacy is not a right granted by government, but again, it's a natural right. It's inherent as part of our humanity. And when the Bill of Rights was written, the preamble states that that document, those amendments, as with the rest of the Constitution for the United States, that the people of the states ratified individually, that Bill of Rights restricts what they called then the general government. We call it federal. Really, we're supposed to have a federal system, not a nationalist system, centralized system, but a federal system where the people of the states, having the sovereignty, delegated some of that to their representatives, and they also delegated some then to this general government. So it's the government in Washington, D.C. that's restricted by the Bill of Rights. Other governmental units at the local and state level are not restricted by the Bill of Rights. And I believe it's a misnomer or a misunderstanding about the 14th Amendment, about this incorporation idea that somehow, well, now the whole thing applies to local and state governments. And yet, after the 14th Amendment was passed, one of its authors, it was in the United States Senate, and said, maybe we ought to think about incorporating these things. Clearly, he didn't think that incorporation took place. I think this is an important point, because we find on many issues jurisdictional confusion where we tend to centralize things in sort of a one-size-fits-all model, which is not what was ratified, which is not helpful or supportive of our liberty, but makes it easier for those who would attack our liberty, to attack our freedom and our privacy, by putting everything under one domain in Washington, D.C. I believe that's an error that if we were to allow that to happen. But also, the other point in hearing about this, as we have this discussion, the thought that Shelley mentioned, well, the Oakland County Sheriff's Department says, we're out there trying to get bad guys, and somebody might escape. It's not unlike what happens with TSA at the airports, all of the NSA things. Again, it's all part of one picture where, and so other issues too, some would point out, that maybe there's a guilty person somewhere. The presumption of innocence is being totally wiped away. You must be surveilled. It's for your own good. You must allow us to have total knowledge of your activities. It's for your own good. You must not be able to defend yourself in the way that you think is appropriate, because that wouldn't be for your own good, but this would be. We will decide for you. And I think that in the larger construct, the thing that to me is very concerning is that we are far down the road, frankly. The hour is late. It is very late.
Yeah. Shelley, why now? I remember that was the other issue was, let's let this develop for a while, and then, we'll see where it goes. If we're going to put legislation in place, who knows what these things will look like in 5 years? So, I mean, what did What do you think about that argument? Why now? Why not wait? That was one of the other arguments by some of the law enforcement.
And the key is to construct legislation that deals with the privacy issue without regard to the technology, right? So why now? Because they're right. Tens of thousands of law enforcement agencies already have drones. They don't go through the regular. They don't go through like you saw on the video. Most of your law enforcement agencies who have drones get them through grants from the Department of Justice. And so they're not going through your governance committees. They're not going through your city councils or your townships. And so why now is because once they have them and they use them, you can't go back and change how they're using them. Once they kind of set a precedent as how they use them, we can't go back and change them. Although the FAA actually has control over who gets drones, they have no teeth in their rulemaking. So state police, for instance, Michigan State Police has applied to the FAA for drones. They are waiting for FAA approval, but they've already bought the drones. Now, they haven't completed their policy process yet, but at the very least, they're at least looking at a policy process and actually looking for approval. Other law enforcement agencies are using them without regard to FAA approval, without regard to having any policy in place, and they're doing it quietly so they can set the precedent of how they use it, so that when we come in and say, well, wait a minute, we don't want you to use your drones that way, they're going to like, too late, we can't change it now. So that's why now.
Right.
They're already out there, and their technology is increasing at such a rapid pace. Rosemary talked about, being able to be surveilled in a public place, that you have no expectation of privacy. But I think all of us believe that if we're sitting on a park bench in our, city-owned park reading a book, that we would not expect that somebody could look at what we were reading. And we would think that was private. That's not private under this new construct. And so it's not only why now, we're way late, right, frankly.
So Rosemary, you brought up the Fourth Amendment, and I guess that's an interesting, we're talking about something that is, if this was illegal because of the Fourth Amendment, we wouldn't have to worry about it because it would just be illegal. Right. We're talking about something that our framers didn't probably think about.
Didn't anticipate.
And so this is extra Fourth Amendment, to some degree, or is it? Is it completely?
Well, the Fourth Amendment applies to government misconduct. And the Fourth Amendment, all the precedents that we've had, and Shelley can back me up, or if I'm wrong, tell me, has said that anything, if you're in a public place, you have no expectation of privacy. So me reading something maybe that's improper, or doing something improper on the park bench, reading, I don't want to say porn or something, but doing something that might be illegal, that the surveillance, they can surveil me. I have no privacy in what I read in that park bench. And the Fourth Amendment doesn't protect me.
Right.
I think what we know is we can influence the courts. The courts are playing with this right now.
Right.
And the public can influence their decisions.
It was 1890s is where we set our policy in the Supreme Court for right to privacy. And then, of course, those few decisions that came dealing with birth control and so forth. But the FAA's position is this, and under the act that the President signed, which gave him the authority to look into the authorization and setting up regions for these drones, they say the only thing they're concerned with and the only thing that they have been delegated to do is to make sure it's safe. To set up, they said the privacy issues is not our issues. That's up to the Congress and to the legislatures. So that's why McMillan and others and myself are moving, at least to get the thing rolling, to put in some protections.
Right. And by the way, Rosemary is our panel attorney. So of the four of us, I think you're not an attorney, are you, Dan? Okay. I'm not either. So, what about and we'll get to everybody else in a little bit here, but just the Fourth Amendment. They talk about, like you said, helicopters. If one is flying over and they fly over a field that's got marijuana, I think they can use that. If under my bill a drone is heading towards a specific coordinate, and that's what the bill requires, a specific coordinate it's going to. If it flies over and sees illegal activity, what would be, what would be allowed and not allowed. It got a little bit uncertain with that as far as a speed. Somebody.
You couldn't control it. I don't believe.
They could probably challenge it, but under your bill, what we tried to say is that if a drone is in use, you have to kind of basically, the operators have to tell you what it's going to be used for, what the flight pattern is, and they have to use it just for that purpose. So any ancillary information it brings in, they can't really use. Now, however, they asked us, well, for instance, what if the drone is flying and it sees the commission of a crime? Well, then, because these drones, and under the bill, this is how it's set out, and this is how they say drones are used. Somebody's flying the drone, so somebody can see what the drone is seeing. So it's not just flying and collecting data that they then review later. Somebody is watching what this drone is doing. So if the drone is flying and it sees the commission of a crime, certainly the operator can call police and say crime and commission and send the police out there. Certainly they can do that. I think that we frankly have a hard time stopping them from using, if they did fly over a marijuana field, for instance, we'd have a hard time probably stopping them from using that information.
It's called plain view.
It's in plain view, right.
Right. And then also some of the other events, just to kind of put it, so I can kind of put both sides on the table here. Some were saying that if it's used for border security, I mean, that they'd be flying and they could see some kind of illegal activity. There's no, they want to be able to use it potentially, there's no specific target, it's just flying around watching the border of the state of Michigan. We were also heard, it wasn't just the sheriffs, by the way, I think the chiefs of police was the one who testified and was pretty adamant about the whole matter. They said maybe the Woodward Dream Cruise. Do we want drones, flying up and down, seeing hot spots perhaps? They said, if they saw, should they be able to see where something is happening and where there might be a problem, and they can deploy assets to there instead of having to have it all up and down. So, that was some of the reasons why they felt that this is not as easy of an issue. Now, we did say this was about government use of drones, so I'll say real briefly that MDOT, Michigan Department of Transportation, also said they'd like to use them potentially in the future for inspection of bridges and other, inspection of roads and
Animal counts.
things like that.
Yeah.
What was that?
Animal counts,
Oh, for
agriculture, yeah.
DNR?
Yeah, DNR.
DNR, although they said that they might use them for poaching, to watch. So, when you think you're out there hunting, they might be out there watching to see what kind of gun you're using, or, is it a shotgun only in the southern part, or are you using something else? I don't know exactly what, but that's another use that they were talking about maybe using. Huh?
Well, these are very interesting points, Tom, that have just come up here, because when you think of the cornucopia of legislation and edicts regulating how people live their lives, whether we're talking about what they grow, what they ingest, what they read, perhaps political activity. I mean, there are just so many of these things. One would be justified in saying, are we really a free people? We have to ask permission for so many things. Mm-hmm. And so now the drone's another aspect that comes up. Again, nonviolent activity that doesn't violate anybody else's right might be proscribed by some sort of legislation. This could be used in the infringement of what would be your natural rights, and on a political basis. I mean, political activity. They say, well, we're going to fight crime or terrorism. What would they see as crime or terrorism? One of the things that we found in working against the 2012 NDAA sections 1021 and 1022 and earlier things like the Patriot Act and in the AUMF is, again, everything's been turned upside down. The Rolling Stones said, it's all secrecy and no privacy, and that's what's going on here. And so I'm concerned that among the many ill effects that we can see from this is that the attempt to stamp out political dissent, the attempt to stamp out the people's knowledge of what our alleged servants who see themselves as our rulers are doing on a global basis. And so if some of us get together to protest against the Federal Reserve or against the wars or against assaults on people's rights here at home, would the drones be used? And I mean, come on, the question answers itself. Would they ever, and let's ascribe the purest of motives to all the current people, which some of you would say, well, that's quite naive. But let's do that for the purpose of discussion. The next group comes along. What happens for our children's generation, who are being taught in so many ways that they are an appendage of the state. And if the state says we're going to surveil you, or we're going to feel your body, or do whatever we want to you, take your blood, your saliva, whatever we're going to do that. And then on top of that, they could have these drones flying around. I'm very concerned about that aspect as well. I was pleased to see how the bill was written in many ways, Tom. I think that you and Shelley and the others, some of these things must have been in your minds as you looked at this. But to me, this is a very concerning aspect, and you wonder, as with all these things, even if an elected official says, well, I don't want that power, if it's in place and the capability is there, somewhere down the road, it would be the first time in history if it weren't actually used and abused.
Right. I mean, I think that sometimes you see they buy something for. I know that one county's looking at something a lot more expensive than, than $500. The first drone that I'm aware of was Oakland County Sheriff went to Brookstone to a mall because there was a barricaded gunman and they wanted to try and see in there, and they bought a $300 drone from Brookstone, and it ended up crashing into a tree because I guess it hovers parallel to the ground, and when the ground dipped, they didn't realize that it would dip as well, and it ran into a tree. It was very, in that instance, it would have been very useful because it was a very bad situation that occurred there. But I mean, they once they buy a $50,000 drone, they got to kind of show that there's a reason for it, So I know that they're looking at our county sheriffs out there looking at rather tens of thousands of dollars to spend on a drone. That was another thing, by the way, the bill would require is the local government approval. So the county commission, the city council, there would actually have to be discussion of this. It couldn't be embedded in the budget or going around the budget through a federal grant, which is what we're seeing as well. And then lastly, what it came down to is Shelley and I tried to pin down law enforcement. It really came down to they just want unfettered use. I mean, they just, it was, as you tried to get, okay, so you agree with that? Well, not really. I mean, we'd look at it, and so really it seemed to me, and they're not all the same. I think there are plenty of, I think some deputies or some folks were saying that they support my legislation, actually, that were out there. But really, when it gets down to it, this is an issue that now is the time, I think, to deal with it. And let me just say one last thing, is during discussion at the committee, they were talking about, like Shelley said, that this is similar to a helicopter. Or, if there's a car, if they have patrol cars driving around, they can watch, they can see what, if they happen to look and you're reading, they could, potentially see what you're reading or what you're doing. So it's no different. And I argued that, if we had a patrol car at the end of my street 24/7, I think we'd see it, first of all. You'd be able to know it's there, but also really question the use of resources. What are they doing? And it's same with the helicopter. It's not going to stay up there forever. It's only going to stay up there for an hour or so with fuel and all the costs. So there's just, and you'd see it. You'd know what's going on. So these things are getting smaller and smaller. And I do think that now is the time to deal with this. So with that, I'd like to, and here's kind of the ground rules. And again, this is something that I don't know if this is going to work or not. This is the maiden voyage of the Winter Liberty discussions. And we have other, next month I'd like to deal with civil asset forfeiture and taking away our citizens' assets without any convictions going on and things like that. So I really do want to get into some really good issues that I think are on the table and are going to continue to be on the table. What I'd rather not is to go off on a different subject. So I'd like to stay on, I don't want to go to federal drones. I'm going to stay with state and local drones. And I would also like to not have a dissertation. So, if you don't have to end with a question, because I really don't want this to be necessarily a panel, and you're posing your questions to the four of us. It is a discussion, but I'd like it to be a discussion and not a lecture. And I know that's what we've done, but I'd prefer to stay a couple minutes, if you could, and kind of give some of your thoughts, and we'll react as well. So, yeah.
Well, I wonder if you can explain to me, I thought what you said was that the state government or the police are receiving grants from the federal government. Is that correct? Can you kind of show me who's making these decisions and how they're being made and who do they go to for permission, and ultimately who's giving the police department the go-ahead to do this?
Shelley, you might know a little bit more about
Yeah, there's a number of grants that police receive directly from the Department of Justice. For instance, there's something called burn grant funding. And burn grant funding are federal grants that the government gives directly to local law enforcement. And they can use that money how they want. Generally, they use it for equipment, bulletproof vests, but you see them now use it for surveillance cameras, and if they get enough, they can use it for drones. And there are many laws that the federal government requires the state governments to adhere to, or if they don't, they will lose their burn grant funding or lose a percentage of their burn grant funding. So that's just one example of some of the grant funding that comes. Department of Homeland Security gives grants constantly to law enforcement. After 9/11, when they put together, each state had to have a fusion center. So Michigan has a fusion center. We have 2 fusion centers. That was all through grants from the Department of Justice. So it didn't go through even state government, right? So it's just
Talk about a fusion.
A fusion center is a center of information in each state where all the law enforcement and different departments are supposed to run all of their information through, and then they're supposed to take all the terrorism information, but it's exploded to go beyond just terrorism information to just basically crimes, natural disasters. So it's the concept is it's a place where the federal government and local government with all their information is captured in one place.
So is this a case, again, of the federal government offering a carrot, and then if you take the carrot, there's strings attached? They're saying, if you want this money, this is what we want you to do with it, and then the police are deciding what to do with it without going through the legislative process to approve what they're doing?
Generally, yes. They get around going through the legislative process.
To some degree, although,
yeah.
you can approve a budget at the county that says the sheriff gets $10 million, and there's some line items, but in general, they may be able to use it for, motorcycles or a drone. I mean, they can kind of make those decisions that they want as long as it falls under vehicles or as long as it falls under something. So, that's, it doesn't necessarily, there are grants, I think, go around the legislative process, the county commission or the city council. But then and there's not a lot of them being bought just yet. I think you've got a better pulse on this as far as the FAA. They have to apply if they're going to go over 400 feet, I think.
Right.
But, they're starting. They're starting to have an interest. And, I think that's a new toy that's out there. Yeah.
And there's been talk about weaponizing the drones along the Mexican border. And Michigan is on the Canadian border. And we're going to have to decide how safe is it for me to live near a border, because these weaponized drones are not very precise. There's hundreds of collateral damage for every time they go after one precise target.
Rosemary, what do you think about weaponized drones? Because the bill that I proposed wouldn't allow it, but...
It prohibits, the bill that we have prohibits weaponized. But the federal government, the Homeland Security is already, putting tear gas and laser and other things other than any kind of... See, I'm opposed to any weaponization of
because
drones.
I said we're living on the border. It's not... how far do I want to live from the tunnel?
Well, and, there was interest, there were interest in weaponization. I mean, I thought that would be a no-brainer.
It's not a no-brainer.
But it's not a no-brainer. I mean, somehow they talked about maybe being able to shoot some kind of gas.
Tear gas
or
lasers.
something. And yet, but I think that there is a real safety issue with, manning these things with guns or with somehow to... I don't know, Shelley, did you have any...
Well, the state police, their draft policy over drones so far does prohibit any weaponization or carrying any load at all. Mm-hmm. However, they have an out where they could, with a warrant, load it with like tear gas or something. So, like, for instance, the issue at Oakland County when the sheriff tried to use a drone to find this barricaded gunman. With a warrant, they do have an out where they could load it with like tear gas for a situation like that. But I think like I said, we thought that would be a no-brainer, and it's not. And I think that might be our most important point to make, is that they can't, at the very least, they cannot be weaponized.
Shelley, while we're at it, other states, and I don't know if you were prepared for this, but I mean, there are other states, there's 42 states that are dealing with this issue.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts or what has passed? You don't have to go through a litany, but just couple examples.
I mean, there are about over 40 states now in various stages of passing legislation, but I can't remember which state it was. There are 2 states that have prohibited drone use completely.
Virginia, I think.
Virginia's one of them, completely until they get, until FAA finishes their guidelines, until they get all their policies in place. But for the most part, there's a couple states with resolutions, but for most of the things are pending study, to put study groups in place. So it's all kind of, they're not quite putting direct legislation in place, but they're putting kind of exploratory legislation in place. Yeah. It's not moving quickly.
Tom, I had a couple questions for the other folks here, because I'd read about, and again, this is pretty common, I guess, like it was with the armored vehicles and that, but oftentimes you see companies that make the equipment are pushing these things with our tax dollars, of course, but I mean, sort of thing. But do you see that with the drones? Are you folks running into that?
Yeah.
And my understanding now, Tom, does your legislation affect federal drones? Would
No.
So okay, so the federal government was doing it. This doesn't impact that at all.
No, I don't. We wouldn't be able to have jurisdiction over that. To answer your first question, I have a friend, a Facebook friend, actually in Washington, state representative, and Boeing, I think, or was it Boeing? Or there was a drone company, a very prominent one that he feels killed their legislation in Washington. So I think that is another interest group that's interested. Although you did mention that if we had a policy, there was some interest in the west side of the state to get what was it, a federal drone?
Yeah, I can't remember. The west side of the state was doing something at the airport, but I want to say that there's a Canadian company that's been selling most of the drones to Michigan.
Yeah, so. Right. Yeah,
Tom, you said that you don't have jurisdiction over federal drones, and I know that you said that you wanted to keep the discussion to local drones, and I know that local police agencies are sometimes pretty tyrannical and they're pulling out some stuff that they shouldn't. But my main concern is the federal government more than the state government or the local governments or the local, like you guys even said, that it's the federal government that's giving them to all the local.
Right. Well, they're giving them money. It's
right.
Yeah.
And we talk about like our Fourth Amendment right and stuff, which is federal, and that's just like, to me, like, why do we even talk about the Fourth Amendment or wonder if the government is, going to turn tyrannical? They already have. We already know that they're listening to us on your laptop right now. They can turn on your laptop now without the light even going on. Okay, your video camera on. And so we already know that this federal government is a monster and that they are violating the rights, the basic human rights of every single American and every other person on the planet. And you said that you don't have jurisdiction over them, but I think that the main problem here is the monster of the United States government. And if it were up to me, we would announce our secession tonight. Okay. And
like I said, I wanted to
chainsaw. How would everyone like to not pay federal income tax?
Okay, we are getting off. The subject here, but I will say
that the federal government is the problem. They're the ones that we know darn well are absolutely violating our rights. So
when I introduced the bill, it was just after Rand Paul had his infamous 20-some-odd hours of talking about drones, and I do think that it elevates the issue to the federal issue as well. But we got good people like Congressman Amash and on the NSA, Congressman Conyers, and those two are teaming up on the NSA and things. But we do what we can. We can put in resolutions, urging Congress not to do something. But I do think that when we have a focus on drones and the problems, it's just escalated at the federal level, but I think it brings a spotlight to them as well.
So then, as far as the local drones, then how about we just say, you know what, you don't need to use drones on us, the people. Yeah. So just, because all these extra laws, it's always another Band-Aid over Band-Aid. It's this huge ball. It's ever increasingly complex, embarrassingly complicated system, and every law is always a Band-Aid over it. So I'm saying we start hacking some of it off and simplifying things. I think the way we can simplify it is say, you don't need to use drones on the people. Right. We don't need it.
Right. Shelley, I mean, that's a couple states did that, but, or, what do you think that, in the case of a barricaded gunman, or?
The reality of the situation is, I understand the sentiment, but you know what? Whether it's the government or private, drones are here, and they're going to only increase. So we need to figure out how to control the use on us. We acknowledge that there are reasons you could use drones. There are, it's obviously a technology that for some reasons can be beneficial, but it has to be extraordinarily limited, and you have to have a lot of sunshine on it.
Right there.
You can go out and buy your own personal drone for $65 with a camera right now today. You have been able to do that. They've been out for a long time. One thing that I would like, actually I would like to not see any drones at all, but if we are going to have them, no one's talked about radio range. Why aren't there some restrictions? How about airspeed restrictions or the length of air time?
Right.
If we had something like that, that would help to limit it. And I hate to use the word hinder it, but hinder the invasion of our privacy.
Right.
Is what I'm thinking.
Was there a line of sight?
Yeah, the policy that seems to have taken hold are two things. Number one, like I said, somebody has to be literally visually driving the drone. So somebody has to be watching where it's going. The other thing, and this is in the state police policy, is another person there has to have that drone in their line of sight at all times. So at this point, that's somewhat limiting.
That's a little bit.
Yeah, the drones right now that, for instance, the state police and that most police departments have, their battery time is only about a half hour.
But why don't we put a physical restriction on it that's even shorter than that so that it's in writing, and once it's stated, then we don't have to fight it later on. The other thing is maximum air height.
Well, it is that's FAA. That's FAA.
I know, but why don't we put an additional restriction on it to restrict it even closer to the ground?
That's what I wanted to.
I want to be able to see it. I don't want it to be somewhere in the clouds that I can't even see. When they show videos on YouTube, it'll show a drone. It looks like somebody could actually get into it where it's big, but it could fit on that table.
No, the drones, for instance, the state police have are about this big. I said to them, it's almost hard to take them seriously because they're so darn cute. They look like a kid's toy. They're only about 20 pounds, and they're noisy, so you can hear them, but they're very small.
With all the talk about, the weaponizing and the drones, I know that, it's, to me, the first thing I react to it, but then, I try to look for opportunities, and you've got space and speed. It could really hone in your target shooting skills.
In the back, yeah.
What about, the people who are going to be, operating the drones themselves? I don't know if it's in there or not, but let's say Oakland County sheriffs feel like, wow, there's something important going on. We have to get a drone in the air. The person who's flying it should have a substantial amount of time practicing it, time training. You can even look at when the U.S. Marshals had 2 drones, they crashed them. The one that Oakland County had, the one time they crashed. So I know some of them are small, some can be mid-sized, but I think one thing that would make them not so, just play them up is that, they really had to invest in the person who's actually controlling it.
And that's part of the FAA requirements as well, and it should be in policy that they actually have to be pilots to operate the drones. That's part of it.
In the back.
I got a question with the drones. One of the problems that is going to happen, I guarantee if it's not already happening, is that they'll be used as, I believe, maybe Dennis mentioned, to suppress political dissent against totalitarian surveillance police states, etc. So when that happens, if that has already happened, people like Dennis will be observed and be harassed, maybe stalked by drones. Perhaps, psychological warfare being applied to people like him. How are we going to be protected against that? Because I know it's going to happen if it's not already happening. And, because what would stop us right now from seeing either a federal, state, or local drone just following somebody around? Somebody they don't like, somebody who's opposed to their drone expansion, somebody who's opposed to Boeing's latest drone that listens to every little thing that we say in our homes, for example. So you start, organizing opposition. Pretty soon you're the bad guy for the drone.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a government person, is what you're saying.
Right. And so the point is, we need to have ways that the person who's being surveilled or harassed or stalked by the drone can then fight back and say, they need to be able to get data as to where drones are flying. And so they can say, well, see this drone here, this identified a drone, just like police cars are identified. Police cars, we can tell there's a police car unless it's undercover.
Well, and that is, the legislation requires that they put the name of the government entity that owns it on there just for that purpose. And I believe, Shelley, we contemplated lawsuit or action against wrongdoers.
Yeah, Tom put in there, he put civil and criminal remedy, and part of his bill is that before it goes up, it has to submit a flight pattern.
Well, the GPS pattern, everything, and it should be a matter of public record on every single drone, and I should be able to go online and say, oh, I wonder what was in my neighborhood.
Well, and what was the push? What was the pushback on that? Because that was talked about. Because that is in my bill. But what was the pushback on that, Shelley?
Besides security issues, it was also cost. And
well, didn't they say that would let the bad guys know when it's going to be coming or where it's coming?
This is in the past. This is after the fact.
After the fact. I think
flight plan is maybe like Federal Reserve minutes are released after maybe wait a day.
Yeah, like a flight plan for flying.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's in there.
It's in there.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I think we got it, and it's here to stay. I mean, the technology is here, and if a kid sends up a model plane with a video camera on it and sees somebody burying a body, nobody's going to argue with them going and investigating that. What can we do, following this gentleman's line of reasoning, about transparency and disclosure? Can we talk about getting accurate records, employee ID numbers, officer cameras, things like that, so that they know they're being watched so it won't be abused? We currently have speed cameras. We have, if somebody could talk about a way to make a plane that's doing speed reconnaissance, like in California, they measure your speed between two lines of the road. If somebody could somehow cut the cost of that plane in half, nobody would oppose that. It would be cheaper, better, more efficient for government to do. It's going to be very hard. I mean, you have red light cameras that look into people's backyards just because they're looking through the intersection. It's going to be very hard to limit that. But what can we do for the transparency angle of this to show what the officers are doing, to show the abuse, to show that, yes, they are singling out this group of individuals, they are going after these people, they are following them, they are abusing it in this way. This one guy seems to follow this one girl every day, and, where it gets to a stalking type thing. Are those type of things being included in any of this legislation?
Rosemary, did you want to, what do you think about transparency?
I think it's excellent.
Yeah. Shelley,
that's the only way we can control the government is to demand.
It's the only way to stop abuse.
Yes.
And, I deal with transparency on government spending and everything else. It's a 95% approval rating, okay? Just so you know, if you ever, I think that we ought to just always argue for transparency because the public doesn't want to have a government that's not transparent. And so the only people who don't want, I don't know who the 5% are, the people that are, are guiding the drone to follow the girlfriend or whatever.
You buy a lot of officer cameras for the amount of one drone.
No, but Shelley, we built in a lot of transparency into this legislation, and I think that's not a hindrance. It's just saying what you're doing.
This legislation is very robust, but as you all know, just because it's written in Lansing doesn't mean it happens in Royal Oak, right? So, the only way to make sure that they follow the law is for citizens to, really stalk their local government and demand that the information is out there, because otherwise they'll just keep it hidden and keep it hidden.
You have to have access to it, is what you're saying.
You have to, your local government has to. Citizens have to do this.
Yep.
Well, about 15 years ago, I was in a company that scanned the parking lot, and we put it on the web so we could tell when when our guards were watching properly, and we could. This was 15 years ago, and I suggested we also feed it into the local police station in case something actually happened in our parking lot. The police department wasn't interested at the time, but will your legislation also affect private companies that want to feed into this, such as maybe they could do Google ones for nothing,
right?
Whatever.
This is a good question, and actually, this came up because I think Detroit 123 or some, there's some group in Detroit that actually goes around, and part of them was they had some guy had a drone that I don't know if he was had a contract with the city police or if he was doing it on his own, but I think he was kind of on Devil's Night. He would send one up there, and I think it's an interesting issue.
The dirty little secret, I think, is that and Detroit is better at this than because of the amount of land they have in Detroit. Most of the private companies in Detroit, GM is key, has they have a huge surveillance system around all of their factories, and the police use the private company's surveillance system to get the video, and they do the same thing with drones. A private company, they sent up a drone on Devil's Night, and they have a GeoNet, they call it, and so this GeoNet is basically being surveilled by private companies, but they feed it right into the police fusion center. So the police are kind of like, well, it's not ours. I mean, we're using it, but it's not ours, and that's a huge problem.
That is my problem with this whole thing, the invasion of privacy, the private interests that can invade my privacy, and then give it and cooperate with the police. And the Fourth Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment is also in our state constitution. The same security is there under Article 1, Section 17 or 20. No, 11, I'm sorry, Section 11. But, no, that's my concern, is this military, so to speak, I don't want to get off, but the industrial military whole operation, to me, is this private interest invading my rights and my right to privacy, and then feeding it and cooperating with the state and the police.
Yeah.
See, that appalls me.
So far, you've discussed, the helicopter type drone, and a helicopter type drone is the massive energy it takes to lift. The battery's only going to last for 30 minutes. But if they were to move to a blimp type drone that used lighter than air to make the lift happen, and then you used solar power.
They're talking about solar power.
You could have a drone up there forever.
Yeah, right.
It could be there forever.
Right.
And does your bill even discuss that issue?
Well, I mean, it couldn't be up there unless there was a warrant or imminent danger, and they had a target. They were going to that place. That's what the bill requires.
Well, they could say they're just parking it in the sky or something.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be allowed. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good point, though. I think that, people that see this, 5 years ago, if we were talking like this, they would all think that we were looking behind every rock. But technology's evolving quickly, and they are talking about solar powered that could stay up for a lot longer than half
forever.
Hour.
Well, a blimp type thing could stay up there forever.
Oh, in Michigan, I don't know.
You have to do it without regard to the technology. It has to be that. The privacy issues have to have no regard to technology.
This issue is much bigger than what we're talking about. My name's Don Fleming, and I'm a strict constitutionalist and a strict conservative. Charlotte Iserbyt wrote an outstanding book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. You ought to read that book. We have a controlled media, we have a controlled education, or pseudo, I'm on the drones, controlled pseudo education system. The people are so dumbed down, they keep saying, why doesn't government do something? Founding fathers did not anticipate government having the control they've got. We don't need drones. Teach obligation and responsibility to the people, and we'll have much less federal intrusion or state intrusion.
Yes. Yeah. We're talking here, and I know you're talking here, at least a few of you are, as if this is a done deal, I mean, any law that's made can be unmade. Now, science fiction is becoming fact very quickly here. And I like sci-fi because it's cool and it's nice to watch the predator drones come in and kill people and stuff. That's cool if you're just doing it in your head, But whatever we can dream up in our mind, these people are already preparing to do. And if we don't put the brakes on this, we're going to be living in the Terminator world. We're going to be living in a world that we're afraid of. This fellow right here just said that, I read the article this morning, that the FBI can turn on your computer and watch whatever you're doing. Well, I'm going to put that naked picture of somebody in front of there.
Okay,
but I'm just telling you right now. I'm just telling you that we're in a scary place. The Minority Report, did you ever see that? I mean, you know, where they got little spider things that can crawl under your door and
So what
watch
you're
it.
saying is that because there are some people that say, Tom, they initially said, I don't want your legislation, I don't want any drones. Well, the fact is that without legislation, they're going to have drones anyway.
Well,
It's a matter of how much restraint we can put on them.
But what you're saying is they got them. No, I'm saying we can take them, we make the rules. We can take them away from them.
Yep. Why can't we do like what
you know what?
Virginia did?
In Waco, Texas, they used CS gas against people inside a building. It's against the law, but they don't care because it was there. That's what they had. And if it's there, they'll use it. I know they
Shelley,
will.
do you think,
It's the
how
way
do you
it
think we take away drones? I mean, if
Why not?
they're buying them, right? I mean, you'd have to have a law.
I think it would be, the reality is it would be immensely difficult to take
So
them
what?
away from the government. And what you aren't affecting is the private industry.
Okay, then I have a license to shoot them down.
Well,
what they
that's
did in
happened in Colorado, actually. There's a city in
All
Colorado
right,
that has
I'll
a hunting
first
license.
down.
Right behind you. Yep. Did you yeah.
Yeah, along the same line with you two gentlemen saying, we know what's going to happen is the technology is going to get, is such a big technology, it's going to get out of hand, and a couple of you already said, it's going to be far beyond before we catch up. My agreement is with these two gentlemen, say no drones until the legislative process and the legal process has caught up to it. Then we can somehow get a handle on it. But they're going to use this stuff once they get their hand on it. We know they're going to use it. And if they get caught, they're going to lie about it. We've seen stuff like that happen last year, that they don't tell the truth. When they're caught in the truth, if the news media decides to cover them, they're going to hide it in every way they can. So to put a stop to it, and then catch up legislatively and judicially, and then let them go forward with the controls. That's what our Constitution is all about.
Right. Well, I mean, just put a stop to it would require legislation.
Right.
And
That's what I'm talking about.
that's not, I mean, I'm having enough time getting
You don't have the
something
votes.
through. Yeah, if you don't have the
You don't have
votes,
the
we can say we ought to all day long. Yes, sir, Becker.
What about all these same issues on private citizens?
Private drones?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to I wanted to narrow this topic, but we can say briefly, I just was reading in preparation for today, there's one state that the ACLU is going after because I think they restricted photographing, and there are companies that, set them up because, the company wants to know where their cracks are in their building or something, and they'll buy it. And so that I think there are speech issues potentially, or what are the issues?
There are First Amendment issues around drones as well. But, there's no state has found an effective way to stop private people from using drones. I mean, like you said, you can go buy a drone as a hobby, and it is your right, now.
But they're not in the window, looking in. Are there any?
They
could, but
They
there's
can
peeping
be.
Tom. There's peeping Tom.
Then you have, there's civil remedies there, but
Yeah, there's trespassing. Yes.
Mr. McMillan, in the interest of time, I would suggest that people who haven't already commented or questioned, allow others who haven't done that yet. That might be a good format, and I appreciate you letting me speak. I'm wondering about a couple premises that we're using for this discussion. One is the idea of the difference between public and private property. So are we assuming then that if it's private property that you have complete jurisdiction over it if you're an individual? And what about the question of corporations, partners, or people who have an agreements or groups, organizations? The other question is public property then therefore somehow not private? If we are a government of the people, for the people, and by the people, does that imply some level of privacy even in the public or in public space? The other one is this. We talk about technology. How is there somehow a difference between a helicopter and a drone? Well, technologically, the assumption that you need probable cause or that there's privacy is based on a human being observing another human being, not a superhuman being, not a human being that can fly, not a dog that can sniff, not a man with binoculars, not a satellite that can zoom in and read what she has in front of her. It certainly isn't about, so are we talking about human beings observing other human beings and having a basic understanding of what privacy is? Or are we talking about having something that's going to get completely out of hand and no legislation whatsoever is going to address the basic principle of privacy and surveillance and, you know, the role of government to know what the citizens are doing? I'm kind of curious about that.
Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
I mean,
Yeah, I don't know.
privacy isn't, I mean, privacy a long time ago went beyond the bounds of a human being observing another human being. Because you're talking about what you put on the internet, what you know, anything you display publicly, certainly surveillance cameras.
So there's really no difference between a helicopter, a satellite, and a drone. So I mean,
No,
it's
outside the house.
It's kind of silly to
In a
really
public place,
try to
yeah.
define those if we haven't, you know.
Just that the capabilities of drones, because they're smaller.
Yeah.
And they're unmanned. I mean, actually, the legislation doesn't call it a drone. It's unmanned aerial vehicle. And so that's the difference between a helicopter
And so in the
a
question
drone.
of whether it's a private or public affair depends on who owns the property, whether you have a ceiling above you. We have technologies that can see through walls, that can hear over great distances, that can see over great distances. I mean,
And this is going to be, you know, this is going to be the courts kind of answering all these questions as we go along. And they're split so far. I mean, we're seeing a lot of split decisions coming down.
Right. Let's see, somebody who has it. Yes, Brett.
It must be true that once we leave the ground, we don't own that first inch of space. Is that correct?
After you leave your property?
Yeah, let's say my property.
Straight up.
One inch.
If you're floating.
Then somebody else owns that air. Somebody else owns that property.
Yeah.
Well, I was just reading about that in preparation for this, and there used to be a doctrine that you did own it all the way up. Yeah, and then some people said for utilitarian or other reasons, because of air travel and that sort of thing. Well, now that's changed, but it used to be considered
And
part
now
of your
it's,
property,
now
your
it's nothing, it's
domain.
zero. If it is in fact zero, then what we're talking about doesn't matter. If we don't own the air.
Well, I mean, what we're talking about is extra Fourth Amendment. It's additional law. So, I mean, yeah, if that's why we're trying to put restrictions on something that if we don't do anything will be unfettered.
Appreciate all the work that you folks are doing. Where's the bill now, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, it's still in criminal justice. And again, Representative Heise is chairman, and he's a co-sponsor.
I'm a member.
Representative Robinson is on the committee.
And I'm a sponsor.
And she's a sponsor as well. And what do you think, Shelley? I mean, you're the expert on. You've been there a lot longer than.
This is an incredibly controversial issue, and one kind of good sign, I think, is that the Michigan State Police, at the very least, are willing to look at policy, and they did use the ACLU's model policy to start to develop their policy. So we've got one law enforcement agency at least beginning to look at putting some of these restrictions on. Now, they're not going to agree with everything in the bill, but you know what we know is, you know, these things get introduced, they get discussed. Usually takes 4 to 6 years to get, you know, a reasonable policy in place for most legislation of this, you know, that has this kind of reach. And there's going to be, you know, there's going to be compromises in it, but it's definitely a conversation that's happening, because one of the issues that puts pressure on putting some limitations in place is U of M and another college in Michigan, they already have FAA approval for research drones. And there's incredible capabilities for research using drone technology, and nobody wants to stymie that. So,
What kind of research?
for instance, like I mentioned, animal counts. They can watch animal populations, and it is pretty interesting how they can take these pictures and count seals, or you know, an Isle Royal, maybe moose, and so there's a lot of, you know, bridge technology. There's a lot of agricultural and DNR work that can be done with the drones. So because they want that in place, that puts more pressure on the legislature to actually have some policy. But I still think it's going to be a good 4 to 6 years before we have really
Well,
settled.
I mean, I think it'll be sooner. I mean, but that is one of the reasons I wanted to have a discussion like this, is because in Lansing, we had a hearing, and it was clear that particularly law enforcement was not going to bend too much unless there's public pressure, unless there's public interest and it bubbles up. Generally legislators don't like to go against law enforcement. That's kind of, and again, I'm not going to say they all are opposed to the legislation. There are law enforcement officials and organizations. I think it's the state deputies that support it. So, but I mean that's one of the reasons. If it was flying through, I wouldn't have held this probably. I might have. But, assuming that everything was going well, it might not have been as necessary. Yeah.
I think it's great that we're discussing this and obviously kind of, framing what that legislation is. And I think about the what. When you mentioned in the very beginning about the warrant, we have to have a warrant. We have to, I guess I'd like to define what is the warrant, or what is it they're actually surveying and saying what is appropriate for that. Because I think, there's a number of different things that are tracking that are pertinent to, serve our good, but at the same point in time, we need to state what all those examples of what's appropriate, and then certainly what's not appropriate. And like one of the gentlemen said, it's also ideal to talk about the duration, the speed, the height, all those kind of things. And I think if we put limitations to design it accordingly like that, then the misuse of it will be less, with obviously that overlay of transparency and such.
I think your bills prohibit mass surveillance.
Yeah, sure.
Important. So,
but what kind of a warrant? Because there's different types of warrants, and maybe, I don't know, Rosemary, if you know the different types of warrants, like a specific one.
The Fourth Amendment clearly says that we're supposed to be free from the government, our persons, our papers, our homes, and of course, within our homes, from police intrusion. And so if the police suspect, or they're going to eavesdrop with one of those little hummingbird drones and want to look through the window of the house, they have to get a search warrant from a judge. Under the Fourth Amendment, a search warrant is issued by a judge. They have to go to a neutral magistrate, and the officer has to tell them what their intent is and what they suspect or what probable cause that a crime is being committed or there's contraband somewhere.
Is that the case with all use of all drones then?
Well, that's
part
the
of
point.
that bill, or
but you see,
they have, again, there's always what is the mission.
Yeah, but like you said, and like the others say, they're going to use drones to just survey traffic on the expressway, a police action. No. I mean, do you need a Fourth Amendment for that? Do you need a Fourth Amendment to have to look for a lost child?
Why do we even talk about the Fourth Amendment anymore? It's a failure. It didn't work. It's gone. It's old news. They're not abiding by the rules.
It's still there.
There's
No, it's applying by the rules. You're right. But the Fourth Amendment, we can't dismiss it. Okay?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have concerns about maybe not if it's correctly used, but maybe somebody starts pushing the limits, the effect on general aviation safety. If people are out there flying these drones around, hey, if I go a little higher, I can see farther, and hey, where'd that airplane come from? You you hit a bird, and you can take an airplane out of the sky, just like that. And as this number of these drones goes up, I think that should be a real concern. I'm really, frankly, surprised that FAA is so laissez-faire about this. Yeah,
No, well,
whatever.
they're going to come out with their decision in January or sometime in 2015 about all these safety issues. And then we also have a technology called skyjacking, that you can skyjack a drone if you want.
and that's specifically what the FAA is doing. It's the air safety issue that the FAA is looking at specifically.
And there are some regulations now, or one of the sheriff's departments claim that they have to do some kind of filing currently, don't they?
Yeah, they have to stay within a certain limit.
Yeah. No, but I mean, like I thought they had to file a report currently as far as how they're using the drone.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, FAA does require all of this information,
They have to stay pretty low.
Like a second point, what about code enforcement? I know code enforcement officers love to take pictures from the air and determine, hey, you've got a 62 Chevy behind your plane, and the law doesn't allow for that. So
exactly.
Old cars.
And in Auburn Hills, I remember there was a guy an enforcement guy that would just go around this guy's property. The poor guy was harassed all the time. But Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that would be used, Dennis, to for enforcement of codes. And I'm sure they can
They
think
don't
of
need
all
a
kinds
warrant
of
for
They
things.
will micromanage, they will use this technology as they do all those others to micromanage our lives in ways that they were not granted the power to do so, in ways that are totally against freedom and liberty, what we said we stand for.
Right, right. Somebody who has it, yes.
Recently we've heard that the founder of Amazon, he said that by 2015 the company anticipates that they would be making deliveries with drones. Now, do you guys see that as, are you opposed to that? Do you see it as an issue, or what is your
It's a
position?
Hunger Game.
But also the other kind of drones too, are that
Yeah.
example.
And privacy, yeah, I mean, again, this is, we were talking about government owned drones, but no, I imagine that if those start flying, the FAA will certainly have to. But I mean, once they start coming into citizens' neighborhoods, I think we'll end up addressing them, don't you
Yeah,
think?
that will drive, I mean, that will drive the use of drones as a commercial use to make it commercially more, cheaper for Amazon to deliver their goods. And there are zillions of people who use Amazon instead of going to their local store. That's going to drive the use of drones. I mean, and those voices will prevail unless voices like yours can organize and say that this is unacceptable.
All right, we should probably wrap it up here in about 5 minutes, but yeah, we'll. Yep.
If you go to a retail store and they have surveillance, it's illegal to have audio. They can have the visual, but they can't have audio. 20 years ago, I bought a schematic where you could build this laser, shine it against the glass, and hear the conversation in the building. I would be against that for sure. I would like to have some kind of legislation in place. Actually, I'd like to see no drones. I don't know why we can't do that. Virginia did it. We should be able to do it, in my eyes.
But
But
I can't get the votes now for my bill right now. I mean,
Yeah.
no drones, I
I
wouldn't.
would say no drones, but I'm going to move his bill to do something.
that's good. Then I would like to see a restriction of no audio.
Yeah.
Because the hummingbirds.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting a lot of good feedback and things that I'm going to be considering. No audio. No video.
Yeah, they can do anything, but no video, no audio. Then it's okay.
All right, yeah, Tim?
Is your bill to give directly to ownership of the drones as far as you're saying government drones? Is that correct?
Yes, it's only government drones.
Okay, so what's to prevent a municipality or a police department from renting that service from a private company?
That's a really good question that I would say that they are using it. I mean, it's government use of drones. I don't think it's ownership, but it should say that they're prohibited from doing these things, not prohibited. So I believe, but I'll make sure that it would include that as well.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah, Dennis.
Okay, I just want to say real quickly, the point about the Amazon or somebody else, where there's, you see somebody in the marketplace providing a service that benefits people, if they're going to use the technology, that to me, I don't mind it. But it's the other thing that it's already been brought up, it's not drones perhaps so much as what would be used for in terms of surveillance or violating people's rights or weaponizing them to targeted killings and that sort of thing. But also, Tom, I think you said earlier that your legislation does not deal with drones from the federal government?
I couldn't. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I guess I'm going to say, and I know this is outside the drone thing, but I'm going to say if we're fighting for liberty, I think we need to remember what Madison said. When they do things, when they usurp, don't cooperate with officers of the union, and he said it was the duty of the states to interpose, to protect their people. And so I'm going to
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
For everyone else, the FAA just recently issued the integration of civil unmanned aircraft systems in the National Airspace Roadmap. The better term, in my opinion, is UAS, Unmanned Aerial Systems. First, so that the language mirrors what the FAA is doing. And there is, if you split hairs, there's a difference between vehicles and systems.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That is the language to use now, and we will always update that. But that's the adopted term is UAS.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, mine says vehicles. So
Yeah, it's
we'll change
UAS.
it. Okay, can you make it 30 seconds?
30 seconds. Well, you said earlier that the police want this. I really don't care what the police want. They work for us. And the police are not to be trusted just because they're the police. they frequently shoot people that aren't armed. They start to dress like soldiers instead of police now. So they're not the ultimate source of what's right and wrong. They're just people that are supposed to keep the law. That's it. Not make the law. Keep the law.
Well, I thank you, and I guess I truly appreciate this time. I think it worked out well. And again, I would ask you to invite others, although if we get too many people, we may have to get another room. But this is an interest. I mean, I shouldn't have been so dismissive that if my bill was flying through, I wouldn't hold this. I still, I think if it was flying through, we'd be hearing a lot from everybody because your legislators would be all contacting you saying, or you'd be giving them feedback on what they're about to vote on. The fact that there's no votes going on right now is one of the reasons I wanted to elevate this. And I intend, and I'd like to, with the panel's interest as well, it seems to elevate other issues. So I certainly am open to hearing others. Like I mentioned, civil asset forfeiture is something.
Militarization of the local police.
Well, GPS tracking, license plate readers, red light cameras. There's just general surveillance by the government. I think my intent is to continue to have those kind of issues brought to the fore. And so next month, I think John, is it the 16th? I don't have it on a Monday. It's January 16th, a Thursday, is the next one. And it'll be here at 7 o'clock. And make sure that you, January 16th, here Thursday at 7 o'clock, and invite others. It'll be civil asset forfeiture is really interesting. Rosemary Robinson and I are teaming up with others, and it's kind of not as well understood. It's another issue where we got to get out in the public and actually educate a lot of the public. Those of you that know about it know about taking citizens' assets without a conviction. And
talking about the
some
RICO
of the
law?
issues surrounding that, I think
RICO
it'll be a
laws?
really good topic of discussion.
No, it's not RICO, but it's probably related to drones because it's probably how a lot of law enforcement agencies buy drones.
That's true. But thank you all for coming. Thank you.